Okay. Okay. About to get started here. Consult my notes. Hello, Lionel Daniel. Hopefully you can hear. We're good. Notes here. See, this is my note. This is my notebook right here. Cell phone, smartphone. Some people, maybe one day I'll go back to using little small notebooks. Cool. I am using a light. I was like, you know what? Let me see if I can just use the light. It's just it's like not a special light. It's just like a desk lamp. Desk lamp. I just put it in right there. So you probably can see the reflection. Let me see. Sleep. Yeah, there we go. It's a normal light, so maybe I won't have that Rembrandt effect going on with the half of my face is all in shadow. And hello, Vibe. Cool. So, welcome everyone to, whether you're watching live or you're watching later on. Welcome to the Black Ponder. That's the name of the show. I'm the host. My name is Neo Trotter. And, if you're new here, this channel is about, we do discussions on philosophical texts. So oftentimes classic philosophical texts like, Aristotle or, Rene Descartes, one of those old school philosophers. But sometimes we do new school philosophers too. But, not recently. I've been doing this for quite a while now, a few months. But, relatively new to the channel. We've been doing these live streams. Why? Because I'm trying to upgrade my game, my philosophy game, trying to, improve my philosophy skills, because, you can make videos about philosophical texts, just talk at people, and, you can interact via comments, but that only goes so far. Why don't we open it up to discussion in real time? Because, a huge part of philosophy is dialogue, talking back and forth. It's not just reading, and it's not just ruminating on the ideas by yourself. It's sharing those ideas and improving them with other people. And challenging the ideas and, building upon ideas. A lot of that's a huge part of philosophy too. So today's topic, what we have here is, what is the importance of imagination? And this was actually a recommendation from a viewer. You have to forgive me, I forgot who recommended it. But they was asking for the topic, and I was like, yeah, like, at first I remember the discussion. It was like, we should talk about fiction. And I'm like, what do you mean talk about fiction? Why is fiction important? And I think that's fairly obvious. I think I don't think it takes that much convincing for somebody to understand fiction is important. Even somebody who doesn't like to read, they still like to watch, made up TV shows, or like go to movies, and if entertainment, anything else. But it's a lot more to it than that. But so I was like, it's kind of too general. But then they were like, well, what about imagination? I was like, well, I don't know, that's kind of obvious too. But then I thought about it, and I was like, that's actually pretty important, and I actually want that to be a focus in future discussions. What the importance of imagination. So, yeah, that's what we got to talk about today. And Vibe says dialogue and polyphony. I don't know what the context of the word polyphony. I just know. I mean, yeah, I guess that would be multiple things. I only know. I know that word polyphony in the context of playing the music, and like particularly like digital music, like a digital keyboard, and the polyphony is how many notes the digital keyboard can play at the same time without that's like, it's polyphony, right? But I guess I'm sure you're thinking about something else, right? So I start talking about imagination. So it just brings me back because they were when the person was requesting, let's talk about fiction. I was like, well, that is something that is debated, right? It's like a classic argument. Oh, you don't need it's just made up stories, right? But that's kind of been this classic argument that has been debunked. The example I go back to when I was a kid was the show Reading Rainbow, right, with LeVar Burton. And he talked about the power of reading, right? And not only just the power of reading, the power of stories, right? Fictional stories. So if you don't know the value of fiction, I would recommend you go to YouTube and watch some Reading Rainbow episodes, right? Because they talk all about like, it's about opening your mind, and you could open the doors to new worlds in your head, and it just allows you to think about new possibilities and stuff like that. Basically, when you read fiction, it allows you to think more openly and like not in such closed and narrow-minded ways of thinking, right? And I mean, that's a classic example. And then you can go further into that about how some people will argue, as it's probably the truth, right? That certain fiction can convey certain truths that nonfiction cannot. Right? There are aspects about life that are very difficult to talk about truthfully, just like in a straightforward, matter-of-fact manner. Perfect example, if you talk about a tragedy and you say like, okay, well, this is a horrible tragedy, 30,000 people died, right? And you're like, damn, 30,000, that's a lot of people. And then, you can start talking about statistics, right? 5,000 people were killed, 7,000 were wounded, 8,000 had to go to the hospital, and such and such. And you start talking in these statistics and these numbers, you begin to lose people are more than just numbers, they're more than stats. So when you use fiction, you can kind of convey more of like, well, what is the impact of the damage that was caused in these tragedies. So a lot of times a fictional story will allow you to like express the meaning and the emotion that was involved in a real event. You know, the experience of the emotion, the experiences and the emotions of like a truthful situation, but told in a fantastical way. It expresses the truth better. So that's one thing. Where is that book? I have it here. Oh, here it is. I mean, this is a classic book. Oh, we got Glare. Finally, I have Glare for the first time. Classic comic book mouse, right? Everybody, I mean, I don't know if you heard of this. I'm sure, you probably have. One of the greatest, one of the most famous comic books ever written, graphic novels. It tells the story of the Holocaust, but it's through, the father telling, I think it's the father telling the son, like, his experience dealing with the Holocaust. It might be a grandfather, I forgot. This is actually the Spanish version, because you can't even see it, because the glare is it's too much glare. It's the Spanish version, because my wife speaks Spanish, and this is her book. But, in this story, like, the Jewish people are conveyed as mice, right? And the German Nazis, they're conveyed as cats. So like, why what's going on there? Well, you could actually tell more. You could convey the meaning and the truth of the experience in this way, doing it. And you might say, like, well, how so? I'd encourage you to read it, right? It becomes even more. You begin to like get into the truth of the experience of what actually happened through these anthropomorphic storytelling techniques. Of course, they weren't like mice or they weren't cats, but examples like that. Right. And we could go on and on. We could go on, but that is also not too surprising. I think that that point has been made many. Oftentimes when you go to college and you study literature, they talk about that a lot. How you can do like all these fictional storytelling techniques which convey more truth than just saying something, describing something in this matter of fact, like super detailed, statistical way. So there's that aspect. I actually wanted to talk more about how imagination can be used to solve problems. Right? I think that's another thing why imagination is really important. Let me see. Let me check my levels here. Okay. Levels are good. Now, what do I mean by that? Like, well, let's take some examples of imaginative thinking. A classic example. We'll start here and then I'll just take it somewhere else. But an example is Albert Einstein, right? What did he do that was so special? Why is he so important? Well, one of the biggest things he did was he formulated the theory of special relativity, right? Which is this, and which included the notion that space and time are the same thing, are one and the same. And that took like a leap of imagination. It wasn't just like he didn't just rely on his skills with mathematics. He also like imagined it. He used a lot of imagination to do that. And so it's interesting to think about what that means. So it's very fascinating when you think about what that means, right? So Einstein. Again, this is quite popular idea nowadays, but maybe you haven't really thought of it. Like, what does that mean? What it means is, space, like the space that's around us, is kind of, it's like a jelly, kind of like they say it's like a fabric. It's true, but it's more like you gotta think if you start thinking of it like a gelatin, right? And when it shakes like that's gravity, right? So you have a large mass, right? You have a large mass in this jelly, and it like curves the jelly, right? This is how you thought about this. It wasn't people. That wasn't a popular way of thinking about space. Space was just this empty void, right? But Einstein's like, well, it's not an empty void, right? It's this flexible material. I mean, that's what space is. And he imagined that. And as you put these large masses in these gelatin, just like you put, like you have like a bed, like a water bed, right? You put like a heavy object on it, it'll stretch and bend and curve around the object. And not only are you curving space, Einstein imagined, hey, time is woven into that, so time also stretches. So time, in that way, time is relative, right? Because it stretches, right? So somebody, oh sorry, dropped my pillow. So it's just like that required a lot of imagination, as well as, and then he described that through a lot of mathematical formulas and a lot of theoretical physics and math. He kind of backed that up. But he really like imagined this, right? So if you're on one part of this gelatin, like time is not as stretched out, so it moves a certain way. But then when you go more closer to the large mass, right? The time, you're in that curvature of space and time, right? That the fold that the large mass is warping the area, and so you're going to experience that slope, that little warp, and that way of thinking about the space that's around us is actually a great way to think about it, because that's really how it works. Like they even have to for it, that's just how it actually works. For example, there's satellites up in the sky and orbiting the Earth, and we use these satellites with our GPS systems. Like if you use Google Maps, right, and you're using the way you're using Google Maps to give you directions, your Google Maps device will ping the satellite your location, and then the satellite will ping it back to your device. But it has to account for that differentiation in time, right? Because time moves differently. The satellite, the satellite is orbiting the Earth. Time moves like slightly. Is it faster or slower? I don't know. Is either faster or it's slower, but like very, very slight differential, right? But there's mathematical calculations that account for that. And then that gives you an accurate display of where you're at. But if we wasn't aware about the time differential, we would have these inaccurate directions. So we know it's true, right? We know that time does warp based off of your location relative to like large masses like the Earth. And so like that's a cool way of using your imagination to discover, like, to to really think about the truth of reality. And I bring that up because, as kids, as children, we're taught, it's common for kids to be taught, like, yeah, use your imagination. That's very important. It's very important to use your imagination. You gotta, like, build your fantasy. You gotta build your brain to, like, think about things, outside the box. And it's important for kids to play. And it's important for kids to, like, think about stories, because creativity is important, right? But then as we get older, right, we're kind of taught to, okay, you're grown now, so you need to stop being so imaginative. You gotta stop with this creativity. You can't live in fantasy all the time, right? You gotta grow up. You gotta, like, start, like, thinking, just accepting reality for what it is, right? That's like the opposite of what we're told when we're kids. But as we grow up, there's this expectation where it's like you fantasize about the world, and you create, you think about things in alternate viewpoints, and you're discouraged because it's like, oh, that's kind of immature, don't you think? That's not really part of reality, right? You need to just, like, accept the things as they are, right? Right. And that kind of discouragement is really, like, hindering our ability to solve problems. Right? Problems of, like, huge magnitude. You would say problems like, how, like what we talked about with Einstein. How do you describe the universe? That's a problem that we solve. But you could even go about with, more practical problems, like climate change, for instance. Take, for example, climate change. That's a big one. And that's, like, very relevant to what we are dealing with today. Cool. Levels are good. How do we solve the problem of climate change? So many people would be like, oh, it's too big. Okay, levels are a little off. Let's see. Testing. Okay, that's too much. Testing. 1 2 1 2. Okay. Let me bring it down. All right. Let me bring it down a little bit more. Sorry. I see I'm peaking here. Yeah, so you're like, okay, how do we deal with climate change? How do we do it? And, many people, they'll just kind of raise their hands like, it's impossible. Like, we can't deal with this. It's too big. And it's like, well, use your imagination. Right? Use your imagination. Think about it. Like, it can happen. But a lot of people, like, they'll just look at the world as it is and be like, well, let's look at the world as it is. There's no way that we can solve these problems. It's like, well, you got to stop looking at the world as it is and start, like, imagining a new world. And, that's not childish. That's, like, actually, like, solving the problem. Hello, CE. Caught your live. Cool. So how, we could just roll with the climate change example for a minute. You would say, like, well, how do you do it? Well, yeah, I mean, maybe many people know already that much of the technology that's needed to solve the issues of climate change are already developed. like a lot of, like, the technical ability to solve climate change is already here. We could do it. I mean, the problem is a political problem, right? That's the problem. It's like, corporations make huge amounts of profit off of oil, so they don't want to give it up. And you also got people who are kind of invested in old ideas, and they don't want to give it up. It's an issue of political will, really. So technically, we have the technology, clean energy, what you would call, like, non-fossil fuel energy. we have the capability to do it. Even like, you know, technology where it sucks carbon dioxide from the air, we have that already developed. It's an issue of going about it now, but that's not to diminish the difficulty. Like, okay, so it's a political problem, right? So how do you deal with the politics of it? Right, that's hard to do too. And then you might say to yourself, well, there's no way you could convince these people that to change. It's just not going to happen. But again, you're like, are you using your imagination? Is the question. It's like, yeah, I think you can. And then C says, I'm terrible at math, but studying geometry for my degree really shifted how I looked at the world. You know, it changed my opinion of mathematics. I wasn't a fan until it was trigonometry. Really, trigonometry was what really I was like, oh wow, that's so cool. When you learn about the unit circle, yeah, I mean, you can use this mathematical paradigm called the unit circle to understand trigonometric functions like sine, cosine, tangent. There's other ways to understand those functions, but I did the unit circle, and it really just made mathematics more relevant and clear for me. And that's why I kind of fell in love with mathematics after that. It's like, wow, like these, because I always have a calculator, and you have that button, sine, cosine, tangent, and you're like, what is this? What does this even mean? But then that's why I started like really loving like the study of waves. Right. And that's, to me, like the study of waves and like waveforms and like the mathematical expressions of waves. That's really very fascinating to me, because it's this abstract idea, but it's like so applicable to all types of things that we do. Like light moves in a wave, electroparticles, electricity moves in waves. So, you know, radio waves, you know, I listen to the radio, FM radio, and that's in waves. You know, you go to the ocean and you see the ocean waves, and that all can be expressed through trigonometry. I know, it's just fascinating to me. So that was what really did it for me. The book Fossil Capital is an incredible read if you have the time. Okay, I'll check it out. Never heard of that one. Oh, and then Dr. Squires says, hey, dude, dig the shirt. Cool. Yeah, I dig it. Thanks, Dashiki. Right. I think I bought this when I was a teenager, so that was a long time ago. But it still fits, because Dashikis are oversized. So they can fit you. But yeah, so if it's an issue, climate change is an issue of political will, and you're like, well, how are we going to deal with this? You know, you got certain people who are just not going to move. And it's like, well, you know, you just have to like use your imagination and think about, there's a way for us to do this. And, you know, we can further talk about, like, if you would like to, like, discuss how to deal with that. But, you know, I'll give you another example. Another example is, like, the political philosophy of abolition. You know, what? An abolition, I mean, like, the modern sense of abolition. You know, old school abolition was, like, you know, the abolishment of slavery, right? Which is, you know, still going, that type of abolition is still a thing, right? Because unfortunately, slavery still does exist. Not shadow slavery, right? But many different kinds. But when we're talking about what I'm bringing up abolition, I'm talking about like the more modern social activist movement of abolishing prisons and police, surveillance. That's another one. You know, when people say abolish the police or like defund the police, you know, we could just focus on that for a minute. I've done videos on these topics, You might say to yourself, well, how the hell, like, when you talk about abolish the police, like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you need police to keep you safe, right? And, you know, you could go about we could go about, like, well, do police actually keep you safe? And, I mean, I would argue no, because I'm an abolitionist. And, you know, if you want to, like, talk that through on the stream, I'd be happy to do that. Or you can check out some of my abolitionist videos. But I would argue, like, yeah, police don't really make us safe. So the question then becomes, well, if we don't have police, then how are we going to be safe in society? And, you know, so how do you do it? Right? And so people might think about it for like 15, 20 seconds and be like, I don't know. Okay, I give up. We must have police. It's like, well, hold on a minute. Like, take some time and imagine if it's possible. Like, to what would you do? Like, what as a society could we do that would address the issue of safety? Like, let's think about it, and let's use our imagination as well. But, you know, not imagination without logic and reason. You could combine the two. You know, I would argue, for example, and this is statistically backed. You know, a lot of sociological research has been done, socioeconomic research has been done to show, you know, most people commit crimes, and then you can talk about what is crime, right? Most people commit crimes because of a lack of resources, right? They don't have the resources, and so they commit crimes to gather the resources. A lot of people say, like, well, you know, crime is done by bad people. It's a moral issue. But really, when you look at the statistics, it's not, right? It's not like a situation where it's just bad people, like evil people create crime. Mostly that's not the case. So really, when you look at it, like, most people who commit crime are people who are like in poverty, homeless people, you know, people who are like, you know, poor people, right? You know, and people who have less money in this country, United States, tend to be, you know, less wealth, I would say, tend to be like people of color, you know, queer people, women, right? And, you know, you see these direct correlations. So what we need to address safety, like for people to stop committing crime, is we need people greater access of resources. So what do we mean by resources? You know, food, right? We need access to food. We need access to healthcare, right? Because a lot of people will commit crime because they don't have access to good healthcare, and that, you know, a lot of that is mental health, right? You know, and then you can go further and talk about like education. You know, the more access to education people have, the less likely they will commit crime, right? You know, extracurricular activities like community centers, for instance. You tend to see the communities with the most crime are the ones that don't have community centers, and, like, you know, places where you can you know, just chill out, like play some basketball, or, you know, go to the arcade or something like that. It's funny. They don't really have arcades anymore in America. They have a few, but not many. You know, library access, right? Things like that. You know, and so now we're imagining a world. It's like, okay, how do we do that? Like, how do we, for example, deal with homelessness, right? You know, that's another thing. Like, shelter, right? Everybody should, you know, because that's another reason why a lot of people commit crime, because they don't have a place to live. So it's like, okay, how do we guarantee everybody has a place to stay? Right? Well, you know, it's not like that difficult. I mean, one example here So I live in the city of Memphis in Tennessee, and it's pretty absurd. They actually charge homeless people to stay at homeless shelters. Is it only the men? I think they charge them like $6 or $7 a night, which is, does that make sense? But it's true. Like, it's absurd. So, and of course they don't have any money. So how are they gonna stay? So what happens? Like, they don't have any money, and they have to, but they need to stay at the homeless shelter because they don't got another place. So they steal. They steal money. They commit a crime, right? So maybe we can imagine a world or a society where you don't have to pay to stay at a homeless shelter. I mean, I don't know. That might reduce some crime there, you know. And we can go on and on and on, right? You know. So what I'm saying is, like, imagination is important, right? Because it allows you to think about, like, things alternatively. Yeah, it allows you to, like, not accept the status quo, because the status quo often is not good. You know, and you think about, like, all these big problems in the world. Crime is like a huge problem. That's kind of a global thing. In the United States of America, it's like it's a bit a hot button topic, but you know, most places in the world that's a thing. And you might say, "Oh, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this?" Well, we'll just do the same thing that we've always done. We'll just rely on the police, and we'll just give them more money. And yeah, the thing is, that's not working, right? Because that's what's happening now. It's a lack of imagination, right? It's like, crime is up, so we'll just, like, divert all resources to, like, to policing, where it's like, okay, we'll deck them out like a Call of Duty soldier. You know, that video game Call of Duty? They look like paramilitary people. You know, they got like a enormous bulletproof vest, and they got like a helmet, and they got, like, you know, big ass pockets with, like, all types of, like, weapons on them. They look like they're, like, straight out of the military, right? And then crime is still high, and you're like, okay, I guess we'll just give them more money. Where's the money coming from? I guess we'll just close down this community center. That's where we'll put all the money in. All that homeless shelter, you know, we'll start charging people so then we won't have to pay the maintenance. And then we can direct that money to police, and then that'll solve the problem. You know, the school needs money. Well, let's not give money to school. Instead, let's just divert that money to policing, because that will solve it. And so there's a lack of imagination. This is why imagination is so important. It's like, well, let's think about, like, alternatives. Right? And you could just, like, think about all types of other things. Right? I mean, you could talk about queer identity. That's another thing where people who don't accept, you know, and this is just me talking. I feel like, I mean, there's a number of things happening. You know, it's like, you know, it's a fear. It's a fear of difference, but I think it's also a lack of imagination. And if you would like to talk about that, like, wow, I don't like, you know, I don't accept that identity, and I'm not fearful. Well, you know, I would like to talk to you about that, because I think there is some fear and or lack of imagination. Because, you know, here where I'm from, there's like a whole book banning thing going on. You might have heard of it, where it's like any book that's books that are about, like, LGBTQ identity, LGBTQ plus queer, you know, identity, or, you know, and also just stories about people of color dealing with racism. Right, these books are being banned. They're being banned, and, you know, you can talk about why are they being banned. Well, you know, they attack the status quo, which, you know, further attacks the power structures, and they don't, you know, people who are in those positions of power, they don't want to lose that power. But so there's that aspect of it. but you know but there's a lot of people who are like agreeing with the bookman who are not in those positions of power. So what's going on with them? I would say like you're lacking imagination. When you say like, oh well, you know, I just don't agree with the idea of gender. Why? Like why do you not agree with it? Because it's different. So are you afraid of different? Well, it's not natural, really. It's not natural. I was actually like I stumbled upon a Wikipedia page. Just sometimes I go down these Wikipedia rabbit holes, and and it was this enormous like article. It was like homosexuality or homosexual behavior in the animal kingdom. It just was like all these species. I mean, it must have been, it was some. Basically, you read that, and you know, it's a well written Wikipedia, but well sourced, well cited. You know, I checked a lot of the citations. I'm like, okay, in the animal, other animals exhibit like queer behavior. You know, it's not even unusual, right? It's not unusual at all, right? That's the thing that many animals experience. You know. Express that kind of they just don't have a problem with it like us humans do, right? Because I don't know, maybe we lack imagination. And then CE says it's considered deviant. Yeah. So, and then I would say like quote unquote deviant. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Like why? You know, well, what makes it deviant? Right? And you know, most people don't want to like continue on that discussion. Because they don't want to talk about it, but I would encourage you, like, well, you know, I always say, like, I think we have a very limited idea of human beings. I would ask, like, what does it mean to be a human being? Like, and I've posed this question many times on this channel. Like, I think one of our problems as a species is we have this. First of all, we don't know when you ask like what is a human being, we have no idea. We have no idea what it means to be a human being. You might say, well, you know, there's a genetic code. It's like, really, that's it? The genetic code, which varies, right? Which that varies already. You know, and so what happens is, what does it mean to be a human? We start like defaulting in these definitions of man, woman. That's kind of like where we default to. Well, you know, a human man is this, and a human woman is this, and this. And that's what it means to be a human being. Really? No. And I would just say, like, well, that's a lack of imagination. And it's like, I would further say, like, we won't really progress as a species or evolve as a species if we just lock ourselves in these, like, antiquated ideas of personhood, right? So you could even further go even deeper in this and talk about evolution, you know, biological evolution, you know, the theory of evolution from Darwin. For us human beings, like, evolution is kind of like biological evolution is kind of you know, we've kind of like through our technology, we've kind of like blocked that, right? Which is not bad. Like, we're still evolving, but we're evolving more through technology, right? Because, you know, our medical science is so advanced. Like, you know, for example, people wear glasses now. You know, if this was like just straight up Darwin biology, evolution, like, the people who wore glasses, they would have like died off by now, right? But because we manufacture our medical technology, we create glasses like that. So people will always have that kind of unless we like start developing like designer babies or something like that, which is the thing that you never know. Like we're pushing that technology too. But I think, like, you know, nowadays, like, people who people who lose their hearing, we just create hearing aids. Like I know people who use hearing aids, and they're just so advanced, right? They can barely hear you. They put one of these hearing aids in them, and it's like they hear across the room. Like they hear better than me. I don't have perfect hearing, but fortunately, thank goodness, as of yet, I don't need hearing aids. But people who have hearing aids, who are like, they hear better than me. So what I'm saying is like that the old school Darwin evolution, what is it? Evolution through natural selection. That really doesn't apply to human beings anymore, because our technology kind of eliminates that natural selection, right? But how do we evolve? Like we're now evolved, but we are still evolving, right? In what I said. So now we start to use the imagination, right? So how are we evolving if not like, because people who have genes, they have poor eyesight, they're going to continue down the line because they could just wear glasses or contact lens or whatever. People who have poor hearing, eventually they could keep passing on their genes because they have hearing aids. I was born with like really crooked teeth. My teeth were hella crooked, but I got braces. I wore braces for 3 years. So because we have braces, like people who are born with like crooked teeth gene, they keep passing their genes on. It's like, oh, you just go to orthodontist, you'll get your teeth straightened. Now they got like Invisalign and stuff. So I had the old school braces. I guess they weren't like super old, because the very first braces, they had a whole mouth. I just had the metal mouth, which was it was a lot of kids. It was quite a few kids with the metal mouth, so it wasn't that big of a deal doing that. But so how are we evolving as a species? It's fascinating, isn't it? I think now we're at a point where it's about ideas. Like our ideas are what going to dictate our survivability as a human species, right? Which is pretty crazy to think about, but it's true. It's no longer about like genes. It's just about like our will to accept or reject ideas, right? Like climate change. Like, do you believe we should continue using fossil fuel? And if you believe that, then we are, if enough human beings believe that, we will die out as a species. But if more human beings have that will to say, no, we need to stop doing this, then we will evolve, right? It's fascinating to think about it. Or just other things like queer identity is another thing. It's like, will we continue to evolve in this binary type of system of like you're either a man or you're a woman, or will we begin to like progress as a species where we start accepting, so this is an idea, we're accepting that there are people who are not 100% man, 100% woman, or they can they're born like has biologically born a certain sex, but then identify as another gender, therefore they have this trans identity, right? And then you have like people who are non-conforming gender or like non-binary. So then it becomes a bit our species will become more fluid in that way. In terms of and then we will start to like the what it means to be a human will be more open, right? It won't be so limited, and I think we will be able to evolve into something. Our ability to evolve will expand at that point. I don't know. Right? And but we could just keep going with this with all types of other ideas. Yeah, I think now we're at a point where it's like it's the survival of ideas, like like it's not about traits, it's genetic traits. It really is like what will we accept and what will we not accept, and that's what will determine like how we will evolve as a species. It's quite fascinating. And then now we're like using our imagination. It's quite fascinating. Okay, just checking my levels here. Cool. And then let me see here. Look at my notes. See if I covered what I wanted to say. Yeah, and so like imagination is very important in the work of social activism. If I want to go toward that angle. It's important in science. We talked about that. The theory of relativity. But it's important in activism, right? Because in activism, social activism, you're like, well, I want to live in a world that's more equitable. Like, okay, how you gotta start imagining that world. Right? As you know, in the United States of America, the people who are targeted in the criminal justice system are primarily people of color, and so a social activist wants to fight to end that. To be like, okay, I want to live in a world where the criminal justice system doesn't target like people of color. How does that happen? Now, somebody without imagination would be like, well, I don't know. They just, we got these systems, the court system, the police system, the incarceral system, prisons. How do you change that? I mean, these are enormous institutions. Right, but a social activist would be like, well, I know how we can change it. Right. But now they gotta like sit down and like start imagining like, so we talked about abolition, right? Yeah, an abolitionist. I did a video about Angela Davis's "Are Prisons Obsolete?" Right? An abolitionist would believe like, well, we should just abolish prisons. Many people would be like, well, wait a minute, like, what about like people who commit horrendous crimes? Where are you gonna put these people? You can't just let them loose. And so like the abolitionists will say like, well, I'm not saying let them loose, right? I'm saying like our current prison system is not working to like address the problems of criminals like that commit horrendous acts. Like we still have criminals who commit horrendous acts. Prisons are not like making that situation any better. And somebody without imagination will be like, well, I mean, that's just human nature, right? There are always going to be people who are going to commit horrendous acts because that's just part. Eventually you're going to have humans that are going to do that. And the abolitionists will be like, no, you see, you because you are locked into that the world as it is. But what if we made our society better? If we made our society better, like less people would commit horrendous acts, right? And so you would ask like, well, how do you make it better? I mean, the first thing you would do is like what we're doing before. You'd have to do some root cause analysis. Be like, well, why do people commit horrendous acts? And some people will say like, well, there's just evil people in the world. There's just people who are, they just do evil things because it's a bad choice. It's a moral decision. And, the abolitionists will be like, well, I don't think so. Right? It's like, let's look at their conditions. Let's look at their life. Right? What type of options did they have? And more likely than not, you will see like people who commit horrendous acts, their life was pretty jacked up. Right? And then the person will be like, maybe they were abused when they were younger, or they experienced like some crazy trauma, or maybe they dealt with a lot of poverty, they didn't have a lot of resources, maybe they had like mental health issues, so on and so forth, right? And then of course, like the response to that would be like, well, you just making excuses? Like, just because they've had a bad life doesn't mean they should commit crime. But of course, the abolitionists would be like, I'm not making excuses, I'm just explaining why they're doing it. Is not so much a moral decision. It's just like, you put somebody in those kinds of circumstances, they will likely commit horrendous acts, right? So it's just like, you're just stating facts at that point. It's like, no, I'm not making an excuse for the person. So what we need to do, if you just kind of look at it matter of fact like that, you're like, okay, we need to create societies where those type of conditions don't exist, right? So people will be less likely to commit those horrendous acts. Now, and then the abolitionists would further say, the problem is with prisons is like, you're not doing that. You're not addressing the root cause analysis, right? You're in prisons. You're doing nothing to solve the conditions that made the person go to prison. You're just like creating an institution to send these people somewhere, but you're not like addressing the core problem, right? And so you would ask, like, well, how do you? Then we have to imagine. We have to imagine. How do you solve it? You have to imagine. You have to use your imagination. Like, well, we could do this. We could do that. And the vibe says, the argument for inclusivity you made, I think the basis, is on the survival of the human being as a whole. Am I right? Because the basis for why others disagree on their religious thought. Yeah, that's another thing. But I get how imagination could be used to solve problems. Well, and then I would further say, like, you need to also use your imagination to think about religion, which a lot of people don't do, right? Because, a lot of people will read the Bible and they'll read it literally, which is not an imaginative way of reading the Bible, right? Reading the Bible literally is not like, it's not imaginative. It's also just not a critical way of doing it, or it's not what is it? It's not a thorough, or like, dare I say, responsible way to read the Bible, because when you read it literally, you are like not at all considering like the historical context of when the book was written. You're not considering like what edition it is, right? Because the Bible has many editions, and they're all like have their nuances and differences, right? You're not considering like the various people who wrote it. Now, the literalist would argue like, well, how it is well, God wrote it. It's just the person like who wrote it, God was like moving their hand and writing it. Like, God wrote it all, right? But then I would argue like, well, how do you know that? Like, well, like how did you arrive at that conclusion? Did somebody tell you that? Did Jesus say? Who said that? Right? And then I would push you to it. Like, that's why I heard in church. Like, where did you hear that in church? Like, did the pastor say that? Where did the pastor get that information from? Or where did the minister get that information from? Right. So, like, if you want to like start, because the Bible has many contradictions, as you may, if we're just talking about Christianity, for instance, it has many contradictions. So, and paradoxes, right? So even if you're reading it literally, like if you read it literally, like you will run into a contradiction. And so, meaning, like, I would even argue, like, it's kind of impossible to read it literally because if you just read it like in a literal sense, you will run into like, okay, the Bible is telling me this, but then later on it tells me the exact opposite of what it said that I needed to do. So what am I supposed to do, right? And so, but there is a point where you do decide. But how do you decide? It's either you use your imagination, or you're just like relying on somebody else's interpretation, right? Right. So I would say, like, in terms of the religion, let's say, like, for example, because the Bible talks about, homosexuality as a sin. That's actually directly a thing that's in the Bible, right? But the Bible says all types of other things too, right? The Bible says many things that are a sin that we wouldn't really, or like it says to do certain things that we wouldn't do as a society today, as a society that cares about justice, right? For example, the Bible says when a woman cheats on a man, that you are to stone the woman to death. Like the Bible says that, Old Testament, right? So do we do that, right? I mean, I'm sure some fundamentalist Christians would be like, yeah, that's what we should do, right? But of course, like, I would argue, like, most Christians would be like, well, of course not. Of course we should do, but the Bible says to do that, right? But most Christians would be like, well, of course. By the way, like, it doesn't, like, if a man cheats on a woman, there's no equal, like, the Bible doesn't say, like, well, the man should be stoned to death. There's none of that. Only specifically for the woman. Like, there's a double standard, right? But of course we don't do these things. So what's happening here? What's happening is that you're using your imagination, right, to read. But it's just funny, you use your imagination on some things, but other things you just say, oh yeah, because the Bible said, but that we should do, but you're not like following every single thing the Bible is saying that you should do, right? Because if you followed everything the Bible said you should do, right, you would, like, if somebody slapped you, you would turn the other cheek, right? Because the Bible definitely says to do that, right? If somebody hits you, you just be like, okay, I'm not doing anything about it. Jesus said that, right? The Sermon on the Mount, right? Most Christians, they don't do those things, and you tell them, like, why don't you do those things? And then they'll be like, well, it's hard, or it's like, it's too difficult, or like, I don't know, I can't. But then when you read the part with the, like, homosexuality wrong, like, oh yeah, that's I should do that. We should definitely follow that part. But like the Sermon on the Mount part, like, oh, I'm not doing that. They're very selective, right? They're very selective. So there is some imagination happening there. So that's what I'm saying, is like, because that they do hit you with that. They're like, well, it's a religious thing. People who believe these things believe it on the basis of religion. But it's like, but you're not even, like, that's not even the case, like, because you're very selective. Like, if you really are doing things based off of your religion, why aren't you, like, loving your neighbor as yourself? Right? Why aren't you doing that? Right? Like if you really are being religious, then why aren't you loving your enemy? Because the Bible says do that too. Love your enemy, right? People, that's the whole thing I come across, is like, well, they're doing that because of religion. Yeah, but no, you're not, because I don't see you doing all the other stuff that the religion tells you to do. So, yeah. And here we are using our imagination, right? So, and then you can further, really begin to use your imagination with the religious thing, where you talk about, like, well, you talk about, well, the basis of God is love, and then we did several live streams about that. God is love, And so, like, you gotta start imagining a world, an existence with its basis on love. And if that's the case, then should you really be so judgmental, or should you dismiss people, or should you just not I mean, are these things that are rooted in love, which is, the Bible talks about that. I was actually reading 1 Corinthians. Let's use our imagination with that, shall we? Let me look it up right quick. What is my thingy here? Listen to this. This is the Bible. First Corinthians. You know what? Let me, instead of reading the oh, there it is. Instead of reading my cell phone, let me bust out the good book. This is a new international version. All right, we're still philosophy. This is philosophy of religion. We're still talking about philosophy. We're still talking about imagination. This is a good one. Let me see here. Yeah, 1 Corinthians. I think it's chapter 13. No. Oh, that's the wrong one. I'm gonna be quick. Some people will say, like, let me check my levels. Am I still good? Let me see. Sometimes the stream will just stop. I don't know why. I think it's just I got bad internet. Some people will say, like, where is this? Where are you talking about God is love? Where is this? I mean, it's mentioned all over. Look at this. 1 Corinthians. Oh, man, my glare. Can you see? Oh, yeah, you can see. 1 Corinthians, chapter 13. Love. 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 Listen. And now I will show you the most excellent way. The most excellent way. That's what it says. If I speak in tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. So I can speak the tongues of men. Like, let's say I know a bunch of languages. Like, I know Japanese, Spanish, French, whatever. Oh, and I even speak angels speak. But I don't have love in my life. I have no love in my life. Then I'm just a gong or a clanging cymbal. You're just like, psh. That's all you are. You're just noisy. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but have no love, but have not love, what does it say? I am nothing. That's what it says. I am nothing. Right? So, in religion, they talk about you gotta have strong faith. You gotta believe. But if you believe and have the strongest faith that can move mountains, but you don't have love, the Bible says this. Okay, I'm not saying the vibe. I'm not trying to like single you. You bring up a good point, but I'm just saying, like, it is the case. Like, people that kind of always honestly ticks me off. Can you tell I'm a little? I get ticked off when people are like, well, it says it in the Bible. It's like, yeah, but what do you actually follow in the Bible, really? You select your few verses, but all the rest of the stuff you just completely ignore. If I know all the mysteries and I don't have love, so if I'm saying, like, oh, I hate gay people, which is not love, if you say that, like, then you have nothing, right? That's what the Bible says. Maybe if you're like, well, I don't hate them. I just don't accept. That's not love either. I just don't accept them. That's not love either. Right? Or what? Or whatever. Pick your identifier. I don't like Muslims. I don't like immigrants. I think they should go home. Like, that's not love. You have nothing, right? Whatever. Let me see. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. I gain nothing, right? So if I give out all my possessions, which, the Bible encourages you to do, you should be, what is it called? Minimalist. You should not be materialist, be obsessed with materials. But even if you did that, okay, I'm a minimalist now. I don't own anything. I gave it all up. I sold it. I gave it to the poor. But I don't love anybody, or I hate certain people, or I don't like certain people. It's like, well, then you didn't do a damn thing. That's what the Bible says, right? It doesn't matter. Love is for. What else does it say? Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. I like that. Love does not delight in evil. Okay, you have evil, but rejoices with truth. So it's not saying it rejoices with goodness or righteousness. It rejoices with truth. So it's literally like, what is the opposite of evil? The opposite of evil is not righteousness. The opposite of evil is truth. Truth. That's what philosophy is. Philosophy is the pursuit of truth, right? Which is the opposite of evil. All right. Love rejoices with truth. Love rejoices with truth. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And then it just keeps going. There's a whole chapter about that, right? So how do you interpret that, right? Well, you use your imagination, right? I would argue like a lot of religious study requires you to use your imagination. If you don't have a strong imagination, you're probably not going to be very good in religion, quite honestly. My 2 cents. My 2 cents. Let me see. So that's a good point. Is there anything else want to say here? Just convert my notes. I think that was all the things I wanted to bring up. So I'll just conclude, unless anybody else wants to bring something up, which is fine. Oh, hello. Let me check out that comment. If we are all choosing morally sinful ways, why are others upset about the sins of others? Because nobody's thinking about love. That's not the problem. Love. That's what we should be focused on, not obsession with sin. Right? If we are all choosing our morally sinful ways, why are others upset about the sins of life? I mean, that's the answer to that question, in my opinion. Is like, because we're so obsessed with sin and nobody is thinking about love. If we put love as the focus, we wouldn't be upset over sin. But we are. This has become like a theological session. Is that where politics start? Politics starts. Politics is just about the coordination and flow of power. I mean, that's politics. Politics is about what is power, who has it,
and why? Right? I mean, isn't that what politics? I mean, that's kind of like the core of what politics is. So where does it start? It starts when like power becomes a thing. Once you have to deal with power in terms of like certain people have more access to certain things than others, or more control over whatever than others, whether more control over the community, resources, relationships. And at that point, like, to address all that, politics is how you deal with that. Like, that's where it starts. I would think. So to sum it up, right? Imagination is important. Why? Not just because of entertainment purposes, right? Although that's important too. It's cool to be entertained and look at like a made up story that captures your imagination and sends you on for a ride. That's fun to do. But it's also great because it expands your ability to solve problems. Right? Think outside the box. Look at the world in different ways, right? And why? So the reason why it's important to look at the world in different ways, other than just your own personal perspective, is now you're able to like address problems and conflicts in a more intelligent, more knowledgeable, more wise way. Right. So the imagination, when it's used in fictional storytelling, you actually can you can use it to describe the truth and experiences more accurately through fiction, like what I was talking about with the mouse. By anthropomorphizing the characters here, the author was able to explain the experiences of his father in the Holocaust more truthfully, using more accuracy by using like fictional techniques. But you begin to describe the experience more truthfully, as opposed to that these were just human beings, right? You can get more insight into the dynamics involved in the experiences, right? The relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed. So that's one way to do it. Oftentimes fiction gives us even more insight into the reality of the situation than nonfiction. And then to highlight, to underscore again why imagination is important in terms of solving problems, whether that be scientific, or like technical. We talked about Einstein and his utilization of the imagination when he developed this special theory of special relativity. But also like when we're talking about social activism and like social economics, where we talk about addressing for the problems of the criminal justice system and the ideas of abolition, whether it be police abolition or prison abolition. That requires a lot of imagination to solve. And then we can look at it from both angles of technical and social economic, which is like climate change, which is an issue of environmental injustice. But at the same time, it also going to be requires a lot of technical problem solving, which we already basically have. The technical aspect is already, for the most part, done. It's just the political will and like the allocation of resources to implement those technical, problem solving technologies, right? We just need people to pay for it, and instead of paying for stuff like paramilitary police or like the military in terms of like just bombing countries just to steal their resources, imperialistic type of pursuits. I mean, that's where a lot of our money, the public money goes to. It could go to just solving issues of climate change, but that's not where the political will is. That's the main problem that we face with climate change is not technical. It's more political. Right? But even that requires huge amounts of imagination. It's like, okay, how do we get people who don't believe in climate change or are so invested in the idea of fossil fuels or whatever, or they're just like the CEOs and shareholders of enormous corporations that make enormous amounts of money off of like fossil fuels, so they're not trying to budge. Like, how do we get those people to, maybe we don't get them to go on board. Maybe we just like figure out a way to circumvent them, right? But that requires imagination. So imagination is important, not just because you're playing make believe or like enjoying the chapter or like book 3 of Harry Potter, or whatever. I only know what the Sorcerer's Stone. I don't know the rest. The Goblet of Fire. That's one of them. I never read it. Yeah. So there you go. Okay, so if there's no other comments or questions or things people want to say, I just want to thank y'all for tuning in. I don't think the person that recommended the topic tuned in, which is fine. I know people are busy. I mean, this is kind of for me, it's like actually Saturday night. So people are at, a lot of people are at the club, right? They're at the partying, but a lot of times I'm just free Saturday. Or if I'm going to go out, like I go out like really late at night, like popping off at like 10 at night into the morning, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Yeah, thanks. The vibe. Peace out. Like, comment, subscribe, all that. You don't have to do any of that. I don't really care about any of that. But if you want to do it, hey, that's cool too. Okay, end stream. Boom.